Good morning. Welcome to City Hall. The first item on the agenda is the invocation, and we have Mr. Tom Jones of the City Rescue Mission here this morning. And afterwards, the Pledge of Allegiance will be led by Gary Mars.
Would you bow your heads with me, please? Father, we just thank you today, God, for your goodness and your mercy upon each and every one of us. Lord, we humbly come before you today asking, God, for your guidance and direction in these proceedings today, Lord, and that you would just give wisdom and understanding in the direction that you would have this city to go. Lord, that you would bless each of these leaders, that you would cause them to seek your guidance, Lord, on the decisions that are made. Lord, we thank you for your blessing upon this city and the great progress that we're seeing and the great future, Lord, that we see coming. Lord, we ask that your blessing would be upon everything that is done today. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The first item on the agenda is the receipt of the Journal of Council Proceedings for January 12th and the approval of it of January 5th. Motion and a second to approve the item. Comments, questions, additions? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. There we go. Takes a while. It is. It's a little simpler than that. The next item on the agenda is a request for uncontested continuances. Mr. City Manager.
Mr. Vice Mayor, a couple this morning. On page 10, under item 8B, on page 10, SP 413, the applicant has requested that this item be deferred indefinitely. That's again 8B. On page 11, under item 8D1, H, 1805 Northwest 9th Street, we ask that that be stricken. The owner is removed. On to page 12, item 8E1, C, 1405 North Council Road, we ask that that be stricken. The owner has secured. Item I, 729 Northwest 26th Street, we ask that that be stricken. The owner has secured. And item J, 2424 Southeast 29th Street, we ask that that be stricken. The owner has secured. And then to page 14, on page 14 under claims for denial, 8M1D. 8M1D, Paul Odom claim, we ask that be deferred for 2 weeks, which would be February 2nd.
You also commented before the meeting that concerning the city manager reports, the municipal court presentation.
Right. We could. That was requested by Councilman Kelly, who is not here this morning. And if you'd like, we could defer that again for 2 weeks to February 2nd at a time when he would be here to receive that report.
Why don't we do that?
That'd be great.
Back to the regular agenda, we have to recess the council meeting and convene as the Oklahoma City Municipal Facilities Authority. There are a couple of items, actually one item with several items under it. Have a motion and a second to approve the item on the Oklahoma City Municipal Facilities Authority. Comments? All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Which? I'll tell you what, a long time ago sitting in this chair was a big deal to me. In fact, I spent a lot of my time and a lot of my money trying to get here. And I was telling Councilman Walters a moment ago that not getting here was a watershed event in my life, and it all turned out as well as it should be. But it takes a little while to get used to doing it again. It's hard to imagine I wanted to do it so badly at one time. And anyway, I promised no more editorial comments. I promised myself I I would act like the mayor today and not talk all the time. So here I am breaking my rule. Well, how deep in? We're 9 minutes in, and I'm doing it. I'm not going to do it again. See what happens to me? And I start, and then I just open myself up. The next item on the agenda is the Oklahoma City Public Property Authority, so we'll adjourn the OCFMA and reconvene as the Oklahoma City Public Property Authority for the items there.
Move the items.
I have a motion and a second on both items. Are there items to be considered individually? Voting? Slow. We adjourn the Oklahoma City Public Property Authority and reconvene as the Oklahoma City Environmental Assistance Trust. There's 2 items. Motion and a second on the 2 items on the OCEAT. Is there discussion? Adjourn the OCEAT and reconvene as a council meeting with a consent docket. There are a number of items. Are there items for individual consideration?
Mr. Vice Mayor, there's a substitute resolution for item 6D, and it just further clarifies what we're doing on that purchase. It doesn't change anything that was presented in the memo or at the Sports Facilities Oversight Board a couple of weeks ago, but it does clarify.
Items for individual consideration? Hearing none. Consent docket's approved. Next item is a concurrence docket. Have a motion and a second to approve the concurrence docket subject to individual consideration. There are several items. Are there any items to be considered individually? No items to be considered individually? Passed unanimously. Next item, return to the items requiring separate votes. The first 2 items have been deferred. Item A has been deferred to February 2nd, and item B has been deferred indefinitely. Next item is item C, the series of amendments with regard to the sign ordinance. I have a couple of people that have signed up to speak. I believe the ordinance. I believe the ordinance is going to pass this morning with the amendments. If we can, if there's anyone that wants to speak in opposition to that, you're certainly welcome to do so. The first item, well, I think we'll hear from the speakers before we start the conversation on the ordinance. John Cousins is the first person signed up to speak.
Good morning. My name is John Cousins. I live at 400 Northwest 44th Street. My neighborhood is just north of the Crown Heights, Edgemere Heights, historical preservation area neighborhood. And I would respectfully request that we have a continuation of this. I know that it's been going on for a little over a year. I think a couple of months could have some input from an important stakeholder, which would be the residential neighbors. I represent the Douglas Edgemere Neighborhood Board, and we just found out about this, and we're very interested in it because we're surrounded by commerce in our inner city community. The concerns that we have are vehicle safety, light pollution for residents, signage proximity to neighbors, lighted signs within the neighborhood, and the size of the signs. And I do see that some of these have been addressed in the amendments. I still would request respectfully that we have a continuation for further input from residential stakeholders. At a minimum, I've seen that the historical preservations have an amendment to have it brought before the board or the design committee, which I think provides good protection. If the ordinance is passed today, I would suggest or request that that amendment also include a cushion or a buffer for the historic neighborhoods, perhaps a mile beyond any historic neighborhood residential property would go for an appropriate board. I'm not sure if that's the Board of Adjustment or what it may be, but I think that that would help protect some of these quaint inner-city neighborhoods. In considering the continuation of the ordinance, I think that our city is reflective of very diverse neighborhoods. I have very diverse neighborhoods within just a couple of miles of where I live. I'm basically off the Broadway extension at 44th Street. And I'm not sure that one formula applies to every area of the city. What might apply to Bricktown or the new Central Park may not apply to my sleepy little street or perhaps the Broadway extension that's right next to my home. Eyes will be on the city, and if these signs are not properly governed, I think that we have a major quality of life issue for residential stakeholders. So first, I would respectfully request that this be tabled or continued for a couple of months until the task force can convene with some residential stakeholders. And if it's going to pass today, I would respectfully request that we add an extra buffer to the historical neighborhoods of 1 mile and have prior notice to any residential properties that would be appropriate with the prior appropriate board, such as a Board of Adjustment. Appreciate your time, and I appreciate your leadership on addressing this issue because it is important. And if this is not addressed correctly, it can get out of hand, and we all know that signage can really make a community not what we want this community to continue to build on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, George McQuiston.
My name is George McQuiston. I live at 3900 North Harvey Parkway in Oklahoma City. I serve on the Urban Design Commission, which oversees the districts of Northwest 23rd Street, Asian District, Plaza District, and Capitol Hill. In addition, I serve on the Board of Directors of the Midtown Redevelopment Corporation, which focuses on the revitalization of that area of Midtown, northwest of downtown, including St. Anthony Hospital, Plaza Court, and Zebra Hotel, which all have been, I think, great revitalization success stories. I was going to speak on behalf of the amendments, making a specific point and a broader point. I'm going to skip my specific point because it sounds like the amendments will pass. The broader point I'm going to go ahead and make, because it may be relevant to the gentleman who spoke before, and that is that, first, an obvious statement, ill-conceived and inappropriate signage does erode an area's value. We see that on the Urban Design Commission. And not just from a residential perspective, from a business perspective and future development perspective, it can even lead to disinvestment. We don't know what the city is going to look like after the widespread adoption of these sorts of electronic signs. It's really impossible to predict right now. We do know that if we get the answer wrong now, the costs will be potentially very high in terms of diminished visual quality, and that it will be very difficult to rectify the situation and go back and try to make it right. Therefore, I do feel that prudence suggests that a thoughtful and measured approach in rolling out these signs is called for, allowing us to learn from our experience and move forward in a way that is better informed and better educated. Thank you.
Thank you. The last speaker is Leslie Batchelor.
Just very briefly, if there is support for the amendments. My name is Leslie Batchelor, and I live at 409 Northwest 19th Street. I just want to say a special thank you to you, Councilman White, for your collegiality in making the motion to continue this, so that there was this opportunity for input and dialogue. And I realize that compromise is a very difficult thing, and this council faces a lot of difficult issues. Signs may not be the top of the list in terms of importance when we've got a serious budget issue, but this does seem like one way that we can make a significant contribution to the quality of life here in Oklahoma City that does not cost the city anything. Sensible regulation of signs will help protect the investment that the city's making in improvements throughout. And I really appreciate the 2-week continuance, and I appreciate your support for the amendments today. Thank you.
That concludes the public comments where people have filed applications to speak. Do we have a motion on the order? I guess we probably should do the amendments first. Have a motion and a second to approve all 3 amendments. Discussion. No discussion on the amendments. Now, to the general ordinance. We have a motion on the ordinance as amended. Have a motion. Second on the ordinance. Is there discussion? No discussion. Okay.
I'd like to
No,
ask
it's fine
a
with me.
question. Just a question. One of the comments I've got from some of my constituents is that there ought to be some kind of a notice for residential property owners in a proximity to a sign so they could protest the sign. And my question is there a body in which they could protest that sign under our current ordinance?
Any permit that's issued can be appealed to the Board of Adjustment.
Okay, so their form would be to go to the Board of Adjustment. If they,
Right.
and they
There's not a notice that's sent out for any of our building permits, but they do have the ability to, once we issue a permit, they can challenge our decision to issue that permit.
And during the time of the challenge, the permit's essentially put on hold. Is that correct?
Once that's right.
Right. Once they formally, lodge a protest with the Board of Adjustment, the permit then is put on hold until such time as the board makes a determination.
That's correct.
Okay, good. Thank you.
And so may I follow on that, Bob, and just ask a technical question? If we don't issue a notice for permits, how would one track those? In the Journal Record? I mean, I know those permits are published.
They could make contact with our permit office with, periodically to ask. You have that 30-day window, so they'd have to do it once a month if they wanted to do that. And that'd probably be the easiest way to make contact with our
Are
permit
those
office.
things online? Could you look on the city website?
Once they're issued, they're on the website. You can check it by address that way.
Okay, and from that point, once they're issued, there's a 30-day window.
That's correct.
All righty. Thank you. That's helpful.
Councilman
If the neighborhood, Bob, wanted to appeal a sign to the Board of Adjustment, what cost does the neighborhood incur to do that?
I believe it's $450.
Excuse me, one point to be aware of on that particular appeal, that would just be appealing on the basis that the code official made an error in issuing the permit. So it's not really a protest on the merits of on the merits of the sign being there. It's just on whether or not they made a mistake in issuing the permit.
Councilman Bowman.
Mr. Mayor, I want to also commend the council on a difficult, really last 4 weeks. And we've heard each of us probably from 50 constituents on this matter. And we started with the idea, or some of us started with the idea that the sonic sign is here, that kind of electronic signage is here and is here to stay, and could we look at something more thoughtful and purposeful with respect to that type and kind of sign? And I did some looking in the last couple of weeks at the typical signs that we see throughout the cities that we're all familiar with, the 7-Elevens, the Walgreens. They also fit the display area, fits within the 100 square feet that we're setting now with this amendment. And I think for the audience here and the general audience, when we look at the Civic Center, probably the measure of how far this can go is our own Civic Center sign, right here on the west end of the building, the marquee that announces attractions and events at the Civic Center. The display board of that sign is right at 94 square feet. So that's for just visual as to what this can do, as well as accommodate the myriad of other signs that I know we're likely to see move to electronic messaging in the future. This is what the 100 square foot contains. I want to suggest, and maybe it's separate from the amendments, Vice Mayor, but I think it's important enough that we set a time in the future to come back and revisit, perhaps a year. When planning staff, Russell was asked a couple of weeks ago, what kind of guidance do we have from other cities? I think his response was, well, we have some cities, and I think of places like Hilton Head, some cities and back in Vermont that prohibit electronic message signs. And then we're all familiar with the Las Vegas Strip, and just the bigger the better. But his response was, for the rest of the peer cities and the cities we've looked at, everybody else is somewhere between, with no consistency and no real guidance for us. I think a lot's going to happen, not only in Oklahoma City, but throughout our 50 states in the next 12 months with regards to signs. And I think it's important we come back and look at that. I think it's important that we come back and look at the impact if we do move forward on the 100 square foot maximum square foot sign. We come back and look at the impact in 12 months with respect to that as well. I just think a lot is changing quickly. This gets us moving forward, and I know the task force has been patient in the time, in the year's time, and wanting to move forward. This gives us a place, but I think we really need to come back and revisit that. I'd like to suggest it probably separately, Mayor, from the amendments, that we do that in a 12-month period of time. Thank you very much.
Do you make that as a resolution? Would that be appropriate?
We could probably do that, ask for it like under item from council, and just have the manager just docket it to do that. I think would be a good way to do that. Councilman McAtee.
Thank you, Your Honor. A number of the neighborhoods that I serve have questions about the signage coming into the neighborhood itself. Could somebody just make a public briefing? Will this allow any signs inside a neighborhood so that we can kind of clear the air a little bit what we're talking about? Thank you, Russell.
It does. Within the neighborhood itself, you can have a sign that's the same size as the current signs that are permitted, and these will primarily relate to schools and churches. So those would be 100 square foot signs. Their display messaging will be limited to, they will be able to change every 2 hours, no sooner than every 2 hours, and then their illumination at night is limited to 100 nits, which is 100 basically candle feet, as opposed to the major arterials where it's 500 nits. Does that answer the question?
Now, how does that change from what they could do today?
Well, they can have the same size sign today. It's just that this ordinance will now permit them to have an electronic sign. The sign can just change no more than every 2 hours.
Would the ordinance specifically limit those signs in an R1 to a school and a church?
No, it doesn't. It's anything within that's permitted in that neighborhood, but in reality, it's primarily churches.
There aren't going to be many beauty shops putting in.
I'm not aware of a lot, no.
Okay. My point is that there aren't any good examples that I've been able to come up with of signs in a residential area other than schools and churches. And if anybody's got any, I would be glad to consider them. But I can't find examples as I drive around of signs in a residential area other than some real estate signs which aren't really applicable to electronic messaging, other than churches and schools. And so I think the concern of people about proliferation of signs in residential areas is really on a very weak foundation. I don't think there's much to suggest that we're going to see a lot of electronic messaging signs pop up all over our neighborhoods because of the ordinance.
I would suggest that could be phrased even more strongly the other way. This does not, the proposal and the amendments we're never going to give signs in R1 that you couldn't already have now. Is that correct?
Correct.
Regardless of the
Same
propaganda.
size, same number of signs, it's just that they now go from a static sign to an electronic sign.
And in fact, the proposed ordinance makes it more restrictive in where you can put a sign. Would that be a fair statement, Russell? As it pertains to R1, with the setbacks and all of the other things.
In terms of, and along the commercial corridors adjacent to them, yes, there are setback requirements now.
So when the neighborhoods have been stirred up with information that we were going to start allowing these signs in R1, we weren't going to allow anything that's not allowed there now.
That's correct.
I really want to, and I was not going to jump into this fracas. I really object to the fact that the task force, and specifically two council people serving on that task force, have been painted as being anti-neighborhood now that this has come out, with what I believe was some misleading information that we were wanting to allow businesses and sign companies to put these things up in residential neighborhoods, when in fact that is not true. We gave the residential neighborhoods, I believe, more protection and gave the sign companies some restrictions that would help the residential neighborhoods. But you cannot ignore the fact that in areas where businesses are allowed, the businesses should be allowed to put up signs. As I said last week, are you at issue with the size of the signs? Which it strikes me real strange, because we're not allowing anything bigger than what's allowed now. Or you were concerned about the technology of LED signs. Electronic message display signs, EMD signs, are allowed in neighborhoods now. And in fact, when people would call me and they said, I want you to eliminate, I don't want you to allow any EMD signs in R1 at all. And I said, okay, so your churches and schools have to take them down, or you can't get them anymore. Oh, well, no, I want them to have those. The information, when you finally get the information out to people, they say, well, that wasn't the way I understood it. I don't know that I have a problem with that. If this thing is going to die for lack of a second, then I'm going to make a motion to strike it and let somebody else start all over again, because it seems to be that all of the issues that people want to get emotional about here, and they think that the city is going to allow a Las Vegas-style thing, are just not true. But I'm going to let somebody else work on it, because we've been trying to find that happy medium between keeping the citizens' sign clutter issues, to take care of those with today's technology, and still give the business owners in this town the ability to advertise their business and make their businesses prosper. And to eliminate these signs to the level that I think some of these neighborhoods want to do, I think unfairly inhibits the business owners from being able to advertise their business. So I don't know where we're headed.
It has a second. The motion has a second.
Well, I apologize. I did not hear the second.
Councilman Morris, I too wanted to avoid this, but I want to ask you to do something. Would you talk a little bit about the background of how this ordinance got in front of us, about what the situation was that caused us to want to address this situation?
Well, yeah, even though we went through it before. This thing started when we were continuing to get issues out of either traffic or planning as it dealt with what they called flashing signs, that the ordinance was written in a way to deal with a sign that had the yellow light bulbs around it. And it just made a circle, and that's how it caught your attention. That's how the flashing sign ordinance was written. And we had moved into today's technology, in today's world of business, trying to get permits for signs under that kind of an ordinance. It came to a head, I don't remember the specific instance, it came to a head that the business people, through the sign companies, were getting tired of inconsistent treatment as it came to where they could put signs. And depending on whether they were in front of traffic or whether they were in front of the Planning Commission, they could get a different ruling on where they could put a sign. The mayor, through the advice of some of us council people, decided to put a task force together to revisit the ordinances, to write them to not only cover today's technology, and that's the LED part of it, but also clean up some of the issues of sign clutter. I think what we have failed to talk about in the proposed ordinance is how we've restricted where you can put a sign. The frontage you have along a street, all the things that we did to help eliminate the number of signs that were going to be put in Oklahoma City has been totally ignored in all of these conversations. But anyway, the sign companies and others came to the first task force meeting and wanted simply the ability to have an ordinance that they could read and they would know whether the sign they wanted to place in front of a commercial property was going to be allowed or not allowed, and not have to go and worry about the who was there or not there on any of those meeting days for either planning or traffic or whatever. And so we spent a lot of time dealing with putting conditions on signs that sign companies and consequently the business owners had to live with that would make it more fair and consistent, so that if they met those conditions, they could go straight in and get their permit. The city staff would know whether that permit was allowed. They could issue the permit and go on. And we have evolved into, and there was always a worry about the new technology, the sonic signs, the ability to show motion, the video part of it, and we all understood that. We all understood the consequences. We understood how hazardous that could be in what you allowed on the sign. We dealt with the technology from the sign companies and from the sign industry. What can you do with it? LED signs are here, and they're going to be here. I don't care if you make them just put up one message and make them wait 6 weeks before they change the message. They're still going to do that with an LED sign and a computer. That's the technology. So how do we get an ordinance written that deals with the technology, deals with the way signs are built and put, and deal with people's issues about where they do want signs or do want to allow signs and where they don't want to allow signs, and how many signs do they want to have and how big are they? The original 200-foot came from a compromise between a 350-foot that the business owners in town wanted and 50-foot that the Planning Commission wanted. And the task force thought it had hit a happy medium when they allowed 200-foot. 200-foot is only in industrial and C3 and above, or C2 and above, C3 and above, C2 and above in industrial. Okay, I've looked at this stuff so much I can't keep it straight anymore. But that was the only, and we still had concerns about that. When the examples were pointed out of where a 200-foot sign would be just intrusional, then okay, so what can we live with? Every time we try to address somebody's concern and still have an ordinance that deals fairly with not only the citizens' aspects of where they want signs, but fairly with the business owners that need the ability to advertise their business, it seems like somebody wants to throw something else up there and say, well, no, okay, we finally got that part, now we want one more thing in all of it. My frustration it comes from the fact that we have been dealing for a long time trying to fix a problem, and it seems like every time we get there, something else is thrown out. I told somebody the other day when they called me on this, I said, you know, if the citizens of Oklahoma City want to eliminate signs, then we're going to have to think about doing that. you're only going to be able to do it from this point forward. If you want to restrict them so bad, you're only going to be able to do it from this point forward without tremendous legal battles. So if we're going to move forward in a way that allows businesses that are coming in and not even here yet to get as fair a shake as the businesses that are already here, then you're going to have to create an ordinance that does that in some kind of a fair and consistent way. And I thought that's where we were now. And I probably went longer than you wanted me to, Mayor, but it's just frustrating. And I think the issue has been clouded with misinformation, and I think the task force and the people on it have been painted as trying to create a Las Vegas in Oklahoma City, and to me that's just not true. I just don't think it's true. I don't think this ordinance does that. I don't think it did it from the very beginning. If the footage, square footage, and industrial was a problem, you know, I'll tell you this. Let's think about a pure. We're worried about those areas that are getting close to R1s or getting close to C1s or whatever it is. Let's go out and talk about a purely industrial area. You're going to limit them to even a 100 square foot sign, if that's what the amendment is, and if it passes today, a 100 square foot sign in a pure industrial area is not a very big sign. It won't do those businesses a whole lot of good. When you think about the industrial corridors and some of the areas out there along the highways and stuff where they're going to put these up, these are not billboards, people. We're not talking about billboards here. That was another issue that got decided some time back. We're talking about a sign for a company in those industrial areas, in those commercial areas. So.
Your Honor, may I say something? I think the committee did a great job. I think this is a good ordinance. Not a perfect ordinance, but a good ordinance. And I have a saying, perfection is the enemy of achievement, and I think we need to go forward with the ordinance we have here today. If we did anything not as good as we should have, it's probably in the area of communicating what this ordinance really says. Gary made some excellent points during his presentation. This is not an effort to expand electronic messaging signs, an ordinance that would control the installation and protect our citizens from a proliferation of signs. And I think that the committee, the task force, should be commended for the job they did, because this was not an easy task. And I also would like to call the question.
Question's been called. Voting, please. Ordinance passes unanimously. I personally want to thank the members of especially the citizen members of the task force. I had the opportunity, after these amendments were proposed, after I saw them on Friday for the first time, I had the opportunity to talk to 2 out of the 3 citizen members, and they both agreed. One of them's here today, and I appreciate the long hours that they spent involved in this process. And I think I agree with Councilman Ryan. It's time to pass it, and today we're going to declare victory and move forward. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the dilapidated structures. And that we have one individual signed up to speak about dilapidated structures, and it is David Smith, and it's item G, which is Mr. Smith here?
We visited with them before, and they've gone.
We have no one to speak. Is there a motion on dilapidated houses? Have a motion to approve the item 8D and a second. It's approved. Next item is item 8E, which is unsecured houses. Have a motion? Have a motion and a second to approve the item. It's approved unanimously. Next item is an appeal by the Traffic Commission, item 8F, concerning no parking restrictions. It's a Ward 3 matter.
Thank you, Your Honor. Is the applicant making the appeal here?
Don't believe so.
Okay, I wanted to give the applicant, I have not had any contact from the applicant, Your Honor. I see that Stuart Chai is here from the... Sir, would you come forward and just briefly give the council an overview of what has transpired in this situation?
Okay, what you've got before you is an item where Jane Thomas had requested neighborhood parking restrictions. There was a series that she had asked for. There was a restriction that was basically encumbered the intersection of Northwest 18th Terrace and North Ann Arbor Place, and that was due to try and keep the streets clear for turning traffic through that intersection. The Traffic Commission approved that restriction. That's a no parking any time restriction. She had also requested basically a restriction that would limit parking to the daytime hours only on Northwest 18th Terrace between North Purdue and Ann Arbor, and then a similar restriction from 18th to 19th Street on Ann Arbor Place. Basically, the primary crux of the argument is that there seemed to be an inordinate number of vehicles that park on the street overnight, and it's her intent through the request to keep the streets as passable as possible by restricting overnight parking.
And the Traffic Commission denied that portion of her request?
That's correct.
Okay. So what action, if we deny the appeal, then the placing of the no parking signs around the curve will go in effect?
That's correct. That's a separate item, and that's coming to you later on for an ordinance. But, yeah, that portion is not affected by the appeal.
Okay. And if the citizens wish to proceed with this further, they could make a reapplication later on to the Traffic Commission with some modifications for the Traffic Commission to consider?
That's correct. They can.
Based on this, unless there's some questions from the council, I move for denial of the appeal.
I have a motion and a second to deny the appeal under item 8F. Are there further comments or questions? Voting. Approved unanimously. Item 8G is a resolution approving a salary continuation for Sergeant Barnett.
It meets the criteria, sir.
I have a motion and a second. You have a second? I have a motion and a second on item 8G. Voting. Item 8H is a request to defend former city employee and a current and the chief of police regarding a lawsuit that's presently pending. A motion and a second to approve item 8H. Voting. Approved unanimously. Item 8I, joint resolution with OCMFA concerning representation of city employees in another legal matter. Have a motion and a second. Comment? Voting? Approved unanimously. Item 8J, executive session concerning the bargaining.
We would ask we go into executive session on that item.
Have a motion and a second to move to executive session. Item K is an executive session concerning interest arbitration between the Oklahoma City and the firefighters.
There's no need to go into executive session on either K or L.
Okay. Those two items will be considered stricken. Item 8M, claims recommended for denial, A, B, and C, recognizing one has been deferred, and we have someone to speak on. Mrs. Holmes is here on item 8M1A. So give your name and address, please, for the record.
Good morning. My name is Cecilia Holmes. I was a resident at 13208 St. Andrews Drive. Good morning to the council. We came a couple of weeks ago to bring the information in regards to what happened at this residence, and it was a water main that broke outside of the home and shot over 50 foot into the home and flooded the entire house. At this point in time, from the reports that we received from the city, there was a timeliness issue with them coming out to the home, and there were also other breaks in the line that evening. So it was not just at our residence, but there were also other lines that broke in the area. We just wanted to bring this information back to your attention, but that was a report that did come back from the city to us.
Your Honor, as I recall, the question was, did the Water Department respond timely? And that was the basis for us deferring this so we could investigate if there was any lapse in their response to the initial report of damage or the water break.
Marshall?
Good morning, Mayor and Council. I'm Marcia Slaughter, the Utilities Director. We received a call October the 1st at 6:38 p.m. We were at the site at 7 p.m. to begin the shutout process. There are two different layers of action. First, the water shut down. The crew comes out and makes the repair. So the service representative began making the shutout, called for additional assistance. It took about 45 minutes to make the complete shutout. No one on the city side was looking at what was going on at the property. They were shutting out 6 different valves. The question, I guess, is whether that's a long time to make a shutout. It's maybe a little longer than average, but not unusual, if that makes sense. The amount of time it takes varies widely.
Actually, Marshall, let's delve into that just a minute if we could. 6-valve shutout is a larger than normal. Typically, if there's a water line that breaks, there's a valve on each side, and it's a 2-valve shutout.
Yes.
Unless sometimes you have to go through some circumstances and do multiple shutouts beyond that. So explain why there's a 6-valve shutout. But a 6-valve shutout, we're talking about really almost 7-8 minutes per valve, which is a pretty quick shutout.
Yes, 6-inch line, 7. That's correct, exactly. The area is a circular street, multiple lines feeding in, multiple water lines feeding into the street. Pressure plays a role in that the goal is to minimize the total amount of water coming to the location of the break. So they're shutting out valves to reduce pressure somewhere to overall minimize the flow. As I look at it, the minimum number of valves we would have been able to shut out in this process had everything worked perfectly, pressure been very low, was probably 3, just based on location.
The timing of the people that were there, the timeline that she's giving is different from what we experienced. I was actually at the hospital with a family member that was injured in a football game when I received the call that our house was being flooded. When we returned home, the neighbors said that they had been calling for hours, advising them that there was an issue with the line, that the streets had started to flood. Then the emergency calls start going in when it started shooting into the house about 6 o'clock. So the calls began in the area prior to the 6 o'clock time. It was after that the gushing from the street into the house began. So there was an issue prior to the big explosion that happened.
I have no knowledge of anything except the contact that was made about this location, this repair, began in our records at 6:47 p.m. The way that we respond to customers, you can imagine that there are various levels of breaks and responses in the system. When a leak starts, and we've seen a lot of leaks in the last few weeks with the freezing weather, for example, a small leak, maybe as much as 5 gallons a minute, will be put on a repair schedule. It'll be checked for its status and put on a repair schedule. A larger leak will be called in for rapid repair. Obviously, a response that's impacting a physical structure or destroying the ability to travel down the street is something that gets a top priority response. It got a top priority response at 6:47. I do not have any information that tells me we were notified previously.
Marcia, would it be your normal process to record any call regarding just a leak?
Yes, we would have. We aren't tying it to that address. I'm not showing other evidence that it was recorded and tied. There are multiple places you could enter the city's system. I don't have records that show me they came into the system elsewhere. I apologize, that's what I know.
What I can say is when the pictures were sent to us by other neighbors, and there's also video footage of this as well, the news channels were out there. When this occurred, it was daytime. Before they got the water shut off, it was nighttime. We were there over an hour and a half before they actually turned the water off to the home, before it was actually stopped flooding into the house.
Is it possible that that phone call could be tied to a different address? Did you have a neighbor?
It could have been all down the street, because for 2 blocks, the line out in front of the house watered the neighborhood, basically, for that time frame, before the main line burst into the house, is what we were told. We were not at home at the time, and thank God we weren't, because with the force and the pressure, anybody that was in that house would have been killed.
Marcia, do we have any way to check the neighborhood to see if there were any additional calls coming in? Or are you saying you've checked and we don't have any information?
I'd be happy to go back and look. I don't have record that took place, but I'll be happy to go back and look at a multiple. We typically research an area of addresses when we're looking at what's happened in the area. I can go back and confirm.
Maybe we should just take the time to go back and confirm to make sure there wasn't another report.
And can we look at other departments, perhaps, who might have gotten a call?
I think Mr. Rum brings up a great point. I mean, it could have been a message left at the Action Center. It could have been a call that went into 911. It could have been a call, which is what Marcia checked, is what happened, a call that went into the water department hotlines and such. So there are, as she points out, multiple places where people can contact the city. Let us go back and check some of the other areas.
So would you defer this for, I guess it'll have to be 2 weeks? 2 weeks. We're not meeting again until February 2nd. I'm sorry, Ms. Thompson, we just continue to defer this, but we want to do right, and we want to check all the avenues to make sure that we are basing our decision on the facts.
Okay.
I've been in emergency situations, and it's difficult to rely on word-of-mouth kind of reports, because people have a strange sense of time when water's coming up their ankles. So we need to look into that carefully.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for your patience.
Thank you.
Need a motion to make the deferral? Have a motion and a second to defer the matter till the 2nd of February, is that right? Matter's deferred. Now on the balance of the items, which is B and C. Have a motion on those? Have a motion and a second to deny items M1, 8M, 1B, and C. Voting?
Whoa. Isn't the B1 tied to the same? So I think we need to defer that also, do we not?
He's
the owner.
Yes, he's the owner of the property.
Yeah, so don't we need to defer it also?
Yes, I would defer that one too.
I have a motion to defer item B also, second. Now voting on item 8M1C for denial. Next item is N, item,
One question before you move on from that. Amy, isn't C tied with Mr. Odoms? Are those tied together? They're not? Okay, sorry. Excuse me.
Okay. Next item is item 9. A claim recommended for approval in Ward 7. Have a motion and a second to approve item 9. It's approved. Next is items from council. Start with Councilman Ryan, since he has to leave.
Nothing, Your Honor. Thank you.
Very briefly, Mayor, I just would like to congratulate Goodwill of Central Oklahoma. They had their ribbon cutting last Wednesday, preparing for their move from their current facility to the former Benny Keith facility, known as Tolson Park. They had a great crowd, beautiful plans. Phil Fitzgerald is their architect, and we're looking forward to them having a new home and being able to serve many more citizens in our community.
I have a couple of questions for Chief Bryant, if he's available.
Is that all you have?
Yes.
Why don't we just, he'll come in. Gary?
I'd real briefly like to encourage the neighbors in the Windsor Forest Neighborhood Association. They have their neighborhood association meeting this Thursday night. Unfortunately, I won't be able to be there, but I hope they have a good meeting. Thank you, Your Honor.
Councilman Bowman.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Before just asking for for the resolution on the EMD signs. I mentioned the city manager with regards to the first and second hearing on ordinances presented to council. Typically, we just introduce the ordinance and very little discussion, if any, and then 2 weeks later, it's on for final. I think, and I don't think necessarily in every case, but certainly this gives me room to believe that had we, at the introduction time, not the discussion, not the reaction from citizens, but just had a full presentation by staff at the first reading, Gary, I think perhaps it would have minimized some of the misinformation that went from that meeting to the final hearing. It just moved too fast with too much emotion, and I think it suggests, again, that we look a little more carefully at our ordinances as they come forward, and perhaps use the first reading, first introduction, as the time not for discussion, but at least enlighten to the citizens and to the council on a staff presentation. So I just ask for that consideration. And then secondly, I would ask that a resolution be brought back with regards to the EMD signs, that we take a date a year from now and revisit our new ordinance, both with respect to how other cities could, what guidance we could get from other cities at that point in time, 12 months from now, as well as the impact that this ordinance has had in the 12 months of its introduction. In 2 weeks. Thank you much.
Councilman Morris.
Just on a lighter note, former Mayor Jim Norrick's 90th birthday is this Saturday, and I just wanted to publicly take the time to wish him a happy birthday.
Chief, I have a couple of questions regarding the fire trucks. Sorting through some of this information, I just kind of, part of me wants to make it public, and I just want to clarify, make sure that there's some things that are clarified. How many frontline ladder trucks do we have?
Frontline ladder trucks? 13.
13? Mm-hmm. And of those 13, how many of those trucks are not being used right now because of mechanical issues?
They're... Five of those right now that are in a reserve piece of equipment.
Okay. And that's due to some required testing, correct?
Yeah, we recently put all of our ladders through regular or periodic testing that we do according to NFPA standards. There are some failures, absolutely, but some of those are minor as far as hydraulic leaks and things of that nature, so we're addressing that as far as things that can be repaired.
Okay. And have all of them been through the testing?
Yes, sir, I believe so, as of last Friday.
And so do we have the final report back on every single truck?
I have a preliminary report, and we're working on a final report that will be ready by the end of the month.
Okay. What are the ages of the trucks that have more than just a minor problem with them?
Well, we have 7 of that fleet that are 1995 models, and all of those have over 100,000 miles on them. That's why we had 4 of those scheduled to be replaced this year, and 3 next year in our replacement program. But as everyone knows, that because of some economic conditions and things, we're having to relook at that.
But we can repair them? They can be repaired?
Some of them may be able to be repaired. The problem with these particular pieces of equipment is they're manufactured by a company that is no longer in business. So it just depends on if they still have parts in their inventory that would be the ones that we needed to repair these pieces of equipment.
Okay.
And we're looking at that to make sure, and we'll have a recommendation as well in that report as far as...
What are the apparatus that have been taken out of service because of these issues? They've been replaced with trucks that are how old, or what's the condition of those vehicles?
Well, they're part of our reserve fleet, but they're fully functional as far as that. Now, again, they might not be as pretty as some of the newer ones we have out there, but we continue to maintain those vehicles for the purpose of using them in a reserve situation.
Okay. So the parts that we're trying to obtain from a company that's no longer in business, do we have a backup plan?
Well, again, we'll have to see what parts they have available that we may need for these pieces of equipment we have. If they don't, then we'll just have to make a recommendation as far as what we do. Is again, it may not be it may be a simple fix, but if you can't get the part for it, then we'd have to recommend replacing that vehicle.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Chief. Appreciate it.
No further items from council. City manager reports. First report has been stricken. Next is a presentation on streetscape one-way conversion presentation.
Dennis and Laura are going to talk to us a little bit this morning about Project 180 and the one-way, two-way street situation in downtown Oklahoma City. Over the next several years, we're going to be doing modifications and streetscapes to all of the streets in the core of Oklahoma City due to the Devon TIF and the spin-off dollars on that will be going. But if you recall, most of the dollars that come from the Devon TIF, all the dollars will be for public improvements, most of which will be either for streetscapes or for some parks, looking at doing some improvements to the Myriad Gardens and Centennial Park and City Hall Park. But we're going to focus on today only the streetscape portion of that, and we're going to bring back Myriad Gardens in a couple of weeks and discuss that and show what's being planned at that. But this morning we're going to talk about the streetscapes and what's being done with Project 180. Mr. Flowers?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. As you may know, we are well underway with the redesign of the streets in the downtown area. The goal is to reconstruct over 8 miles of streets, generally from Reno to Northwest 6th and from Lee to Gaylord. The effort has been named Project 180 for a couple of reasons. First, the area encompasses slightly over 180 acres. And secondly, the result will be a 180-degree turnaround in the appearance of our downtown. The change will provide better circulation for vehicles and cyclists. It'll provide better use of streets for on-street parking. It'll promote more multimodal methods of transportation, promote safer bike routes, and improve pedestrian access and flow. Since the preliminary design has been completed, the desire is to bring council up to date on the status of the project and present some of the ideas that have been included in the scope. Assistant City Engineer Laura Story, who is doing an excellent job of managing this project, will continue the presentation and let you know more of the details regarding street and lane widths, bike lanes, sidewalks, traffic signals, lighting, and the conversion of one-way streets to two-way. She will also include some information about amenities such as benches, trash receptacles, bike racks, parking meters, and landscaping. Laura?
Good morning. My name is Laura Story. Thank you for having us, and we're excited about this project. If I can get this to work. Would you mind running that for me, please? Our project goals: we want to create a cohesive central business district in the Oklahoma City area. We want to completely renovate the appearance in the central business district, and we want to memorialize our history and make way for our future in this streetscape. We're going to improve our accessibility with smooth surfaces and appropriate spaces for pedestrians, bicyclists, and vehicles. Our construction data, we will spend about $141 million on streets and public spaces. Our public spaces consist of several parks and some pedestrian mall. We're going to reconstruct 8.5 miles of street reconstruction that would be building face to building face, and 32% of these funds will be in public spaces and 68% will be on the street. This map shows you the limits of our project, roughly Northwest 6th to Southwest 2nd, Lee on the west, and E.K. Gaylord on the east. As Dennis mentioned, we're going to convert two-way travel on all streets with the exception of Couch and Colcord. They will continue the loop from Colcord around to Couch. We're going to add on-street parking, bike lanes, and the three green blocks are in Project 180, Bicentennial Park, City Hall's front and, well, west and east lawns, and then the Myriad Gardens. Project data, there are approximately 150 people living in Oklahoma City. Almost 1.3 million people called this their downtown from a regional perspective. We have 50 city blocks. There's 92 block faces, and 51 intersections will receive complete redo. This next picture shows a schedule of our projects that are going on. Not all of these are related to the Project 180 or funded through Project 180, but all of this is going on at the same time. We have the Myriad Gardens renovation. We have our streetscapes from 2010 through 2013. The Devon site construction, they have a soft opening and a hard opening. The soft opening this January 2012 and July 2012 for their complete opening. We also have the Crystal Bridge reglazing that has been awarded, and it is under construction right now. They're ordering materials and preparing to do that project. The pedestrian bridge, the Skydance Bridge, which is GEO bond funded and some ODOT funding as well. We have the Court Shore Park, which was passed with MAPS 3, and then our boulevard to replace I-40 will shortly begin its design. Our next slide shows us our existing traffic circulation. We have a system of one-way pairs and two-way streets. It is designed under a vehicular emphasis. This vehicular emphasis has resulted in non-compliance for our accessibility and poor pedestrian facilities. You can see on this graphic the purple lanes on E.K. Gaylord and Reno. No, excuse me, E.K. Gaylord and I-40 are scheduled as 6-lane arterials, heavy flow traffic. The rest of the lanes, orange and green, are 4-way, and we have 2-lane traffic shown in yellow. Our proposed traffic is going to take everything and bring it into a 4-lane, 2 lanes in each direction, or a 2-lane, 1 lane in each direction configuration. We're going to add pedestrian facilities and phasing for each of the intersections. It will automatically provide for a pedestrian crossing. We're going to add on-street parking, designated bike lanes, and in the locations circled in the orange box, those will be increased to provide for capacity at peak hours. But those are the only 2 locations that did not fit with the suggestions from the walkability study and what our traffic and travel demands are in the downtown area. So we have to look at improving those areas. This next slide shows the amenity zone. We have a public right-of-way infrastructure. It's roughly from the back of curb 5 feet towards the building face and the pedestrian zone. We're going to locate our signals, our benches, lighting, parking meters, irrigation systems, bike racks, trash receptacles, and we will be providing a clear and comfortable pedestrian zone between the amenity zone and the storefront or building fronts. Our next picture shows us the parking diagram. We will be adding on-street parking on all streets. It will either be parallel, and in some cases they are proposing angled parking around the City Hall complex. We have approximately 900 parking spaces today, and we will increase that to 1,400 approximately. We will have 100 accessible parking places citywide in the downtown core. We're going to provide for motorcycle and scooter parking, and we are looking at a green parking program that would encourage high mileage vehicles, and we're looking to put bike lockers in with our garages. The next picture is the bike route, where you see the red. That is an on-street designated lane for bicyclists. The dashed lines are Sharrow lanes, and we're going to add a bike rack that complements the Oklahoma City's O bike rack, and again, add lockers into the garages. That's what we're looking at. This is an example, if you were looking to the south, looking towards 420 West Main there, you see a sage green band which designates the bicycle lane, and we are looking at a program where you have beginner, intermediate, and advanced bicyclists. The beginners may use the sidewalk and the pedestrian crossings. The intermediate would be inclined to use the designated bike lane, and the advanced cyclists would merge with traffic, such as when they make a left turn. These colors are not just to make it look pretty. They are to communicate a sense of where you belong on this roadway or on this sidewalk. We have different colors of pavement for the parking, separated from the bike lane, separated from the driving lane. Our next graphic shows us a walkability and open space plan. Each ring represents a one-minute band, and it takes you about 12 minutes to go from the memorial down to the Myriad Botanical Gardens. We're going to landscape the medians that are currently either curbed or striped, and those consist of Main Street, Hudson, Robinson, Broadway, E.K. Gaylord, and Reno. The only two additional medians added with this project are on Hudson, south of Colcord, and Reno from approximately E.K. Gaylord over to Walker. Our next exhibit is a composite traffic diagram. It's a little bit cluttered, but it puts everything all together on the same sheet, and it has your parking, bike lanes, and medians shown there. Our next exhibit shows us a two-lane configuration, one in each direction, with on-street parking. That parking is shown in a darker pavement color, and the Sharrow is indicated with a stencil, a bicycle, on the driving lanes. All of these configurations and the patterns on the concrete are not stamped. They're scored with the concrete, which makes it easier to replace if, in the event we need to remove and replace that. Our pavers are going to be at the corners where the pedestrians spend more time making a decision to go straight or turn or wait for a light. The next exhibit is a one lane in each direction with a turn lane where the volumes require it and we need to have left turn lanes. We identified that and widen out the paving to accommodate that turn movement. If you'll notice, on the right lane, there's a L-shaped green sage bar. That is to protect the bicyclists from right turn movements. It is to communicate to the driver that this is the bicyclist zone. Our next exhibit shows the location and the configurations of our proposed traffic signal, mast arm and the pole. This is an accessible curb. We've identified the location along that radius to show us you can put a signal, you can put anything in that location and still remain compliant with ADA and provide for a uniform context for the pedestrians to know where, such as a push button is needed or where to look for the signs and things. This signal location considers the accessibility needed, the sight distance a vehicle needs, and it's going to create a familiar environment for those who use this corner or these corners. Notice we have a horizontal signal head proposal. That is to distinguish our central business district. This next exhibit shows us the light fixture that we have selected, an IPay wood bench, which is very, very, very dense. It is withstands lots of weather. The boardwalk in New Jersey is made of this material, but right now we're considering a few locations with the wood benches and then more locations with a plain steel bench. Also, you see the bike rack that is selected due to its compatibility with the selected O bike rack that we have around downtown, and the trash receptacle. This is an example of what we're looking at as far as a covered trash receptacle. Our next exhibit shows us a before and after. This is at Park and Robinson. The horizontal signal head is shown. You have a vertical water and stone feature shown, and those are just in the amenity zone. At night, these light up and provide some vertical contrast in the area. And the clear pedestrian zone, the canopy of the trees, the spacing of the trees is equalized so that you can feel like it's something you can depend on and feel familiar with. Our next exhibit is Broadway and Park, and there's a clear zone, of course, for the pedestrians. It delineates for the vehicles and the bicyclists and the parking in the area. And our last exhibit of this, yes, sir.
I have a quick question. I just noticed it in the slide. On the before picture, you have a street sign. On the after picture, there's no street sign.
The after picture is a little bit difficult to read because if you see on the right side of the signal head, here, how about if I point to it with a laser pointer? Is that a, sorry, right there, that's where the street sign is.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
And it's just very small. We're still working on our, that's called environmental graphics. We're looking at making everything uniform and making sure that everything blends and matches each other. So that blended too much.
It won't be the traditional green that we are...
No, we're not looking at a traditional green. It's a black and white configuration right now. And then our last slide is the species of trees. There are many plantings that we're looking at, but we have discussed these in our steering committees. They're talking about installing corridors of trees and creating a very uniform tree corridor on each of the streets. You have your Caddo maple, Chinese pistache, Shumard red oak, live oak, bald cypress, and a bosc elm. And with that, we have brought you up to speed with the progress of the steering committee so far, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. And thank you for running the program.
Laura?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead, Tim.
Myriad Gardens, is it closed now?
Right now? No, it's open.
But with the glass work?
No, it's not closed.
It won't be closed?
No. We'll go over that in the Myriad Gardens, but real quickly, we plan to start that project right after the Arts Festival commences. And we're going to do the heavy-duty glazing work at the same time we're working on the other projects in the Myriad Gardens.
The medians that you identified that are going to be landscaped?
Yes, sir.
What are we thinking about with regard to the low-maintenance landscaping? What's the thought for those median landscapes?
One of the first things that we were introduced to was the concept of a $2,000 hole for the tree and a $200 tree results in a very easily maintained annual type program for maintaining those trees and a very healthy tree to grow in that environment. So we're looking at designing and engineering the planting of that tree, the trough that it goes in, make sure that the root zone is, an annual maintenance program with arborists. We're looking at what the density of those trees needs to be. So it's mainly trash collection, a water bill, and some trimming is what they've proposed to us.
And we've been working with the bid.
Yes, sir.
The downtown
Oh,
bid.
okay.
In regard to the maintenance, long-term maintenance. They're very much also concerned about that.
And you mentioned with regards to the new boulevard, we're going to be soon looking at design contract for that?
We need to be looking at that if we're going to finish that on a timetable after.
Do we have any funds beyond design funds at this point for the boulevard? Or do we even have the design funds to go out for design?
ODOT has committed and has a commitment to provide for the construction of the boulevard, and we are in discussions with them on that design. So I would say yes, we do.
Actually, Congressman Oberstar was here yesterday from Minnesota, who's the head of the Transportation Committee in Washington, in the House, with Mary Fallon, had brought him in to take a look at it, and it was he was encouraged to help in the funding of the boulevard as we go forward.
Did you hear about the trolley plans as well? I understand there's going to be some additional federal funds advanced for downtown trolley lines.
They're changing the criteria for new starts in the transit program. That's correct.
Good. Laura, one last thing. The new sage, I guess that's your color, sage green. Nice.
That's a color that's been coined, and we recognize it if we're on the steering committee.
As we move this year with the beginnings outside the 180-degree area, with the beginnings of our bond issue money for on-street bike lanes, will we coordinate that color scheme throughout the city with our new bike lanes?
right now, that program for the bond issue is striping and signing, and it is not
coloring
an
the
expanded. Right. We're proposing these colors. We still have some approvals to go through for the approval of the sage green. It was just recommended because it blended with the other colors.
Is that an expensive proposition, just adding to the lane striping, the coloring of that lane? I imagine it is, but any other?
Yes, but we have a lot of examples with our streetscapes where we have colored the concrete. I mean, it's not uncommon.
Will we get copies of the update?
I'm sorry?
Will we get copies of the update?
We can provide those for you.
One last question, Laura. I guess the trees just brought out, I mean, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of trees. But are we trying to focus on obtaining as much of this stuff locally as we can from
Absolutely.
local tree farms and things like that? Is that a priority?
Yes. Those selections of those trees and suggestions by the consultant were based on several field visits to local nurseries and statewide nurseries that provide trees. And these were the most successfully grown over the long term and the most prevalent in their ability to get them for our project.
May I just make a quick comment, Laura, and to Dennis as well? I've heard from lots of folks involved in the steering committee process, and they are so complimentary of the work you all are doing and your willingness to listen and take input, and very, very excited about the prospects for the project. And I just would like to thank Public Works and thank you personally for all the effort you're putting into this.
Thank you.
Further comments? Thank you, Laura.
You're welcome.
The next, other citizens to be heard? Have no one signed up? So we will recess the council meeting to executive session and be back.